Good morning, everyone. Before we start, we just let everyone come in. I hope you're all having a good start to the morning. Just going to give it 30 seconds or so before we start to let everyone come in this morning. See numbers starting to come in, so we'll give it a minute or so just before we start. Thank you for joining us so early. I hope you've all had lots of coffee. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so just to let people arrive this morning. As we're starting early one for us, we don't think we do the events this early. Just give it 15 more seconds or so and we'll start. Okay, I think we'll kick off. Good morning, everyone. It's fantastic that so many of you can join us for what promises to be a fascinating session on AI and sound. I'm Stephen Lind. I'm Director of Marketing Events at the Catapult. Normally on Wednesday morning, I have my bin men come and collect my rubbish, and they haven't arrived yet. So you watch as I'm speaking. I'm sure they're joining us. So if there's some noises while I'm speaking, apologies. But they're out doing the amazing job that they've been doing. Before we start, there's many of you that probably aren't familiar with who the Catapult is and what we do. So just to kind of give you a quick oversight, we're the UK's innovation agency for cities, transport and places, and we're part of a government-funded network. The key ingredient of how we operate is our neutral status. This means we are technology, solution and supplier agnostic. And our role really is to be an expert voice in the market that we operate in, supporting jobs and growth for the UK. One of our remits is working with SMEs, local and central government, large corporations and academia, both in the UK and also across the globe, where we aim to kind of help UK organisations work internationally. And today's presentation is from one of our very good and very close partners, University of Surrey. Innovation really has been supercharged over the past 12 months as we look to find different ways of operating in the pandemic, and AI has never been more prevalent in conversations. I think every news program that I watch, there's some kind of mention of some development in AI. Just under 2 years ago, I first came across AI and sound, and I watched a fascinating presentation from one of our speakers today. I'm really looking forward to hearing how they've moved this mind-blowing technology forward. There will be a Q&A section at the end, so please use the Q&A function during the course of the webinar to ask your questions. I know I've got loads already, but in the meantime, let me hand over to Mark and Emily from University of Surrey, who will discuss and present enabling thriving urban communities through sound sensing AI technology. Enjoy this morning, it's going to be great. Over to you, Mark and Emily.
Okay, so thank you very much, Stephen, for the introduction. I'm Mark Plumley from University of Surrey, and I'll be joined by my colleague Emily Corrigan-Kavanagh, who will be talking with me this morning. So what I'm going to be talking about this morning is work on how we want to be using sound sensing AI technology to help with thriving urban communities. So how can we use the way that we think about sounds to make life better for people as we go through the living and working that we have? And I think, as Stephen was saying earlier on, a lot of what we're doing involves sound, and we often don't notice that in terms of what we're looking at, but the sounds can impact on the way we work, from disturbances from outside or sounds that we enjoy. And so let's talk about that a bit. So before that, I just want to introduce a little bit about University of Surrey, where we are. We do quite a lot of sound work across different areas. I'm from a part of it called the Centre for Vision, Speech and Signal Processing, where we do work on recognising sounds, but we also have an Institute of Sound Recording that does research into human perception, and they train music technology people. So often people who are graduates of there have gone on to be get technical Oscars or something for film work. And we're also interested in design and in the way that this impacts on business. So the sound comes across quite a few areas. But what are we thinking about in terms of the impact of sounds in urban areas? There's actually just at the moment a call for ideas from Westminster that mentions noise as a silent crisis for the city. You could almost call it an invisible crisis. We don't really measure what impact sound is having currently, although it does have major impacts. There's an estimate that urban road noise has a negative impact of 7 to 10 billion a year just in England from a DEFRA measurement. And so these are things like noise causing increased heart attacks, blood pressure, diabetes and stress and so on. So this is something that at the moment it's difficult for us to measure, but there have been attempts at starting to measure some of the things that we could do about this. So one of these is in the area of transport. So the Department of Transport's recently been carrying out a noise camera trial. So this is something that was going on at the end of 2019. The results aren't completely out yet, but the preliminary indications from this is that it can work in certain circumstances, but they still need further development. But the idea here is that you could have a microphone that listens out for, say, exhausts in a car, which are not controlled to the right noise level, and then sends an enforcement notice just in the same way that you might do a speed camera. So this is sort of new technology. There's work going on in Paris in this area as well, but it still needs more work before this will be ready. But more broadly across the city, there are experiments on building sound sensors across an urban area. So this is work that's going on in Newcastle University, in the area of Newcastle upon Tyne. There are sensors covering a lot of things from air quality, footfall sensors, when people press pedestrian lights and so on. But a particular interest for us is the use of noise sensors to go along with this. So this data is published in real time. If you're interested, you can go to urbanobservatory.ac.uk. So this is an academic website, and you can actually get to see the noise levels in real time or historically as they come up across the city. And you can see some correlations of things like that. For example, noise levels tend to be correlated with traffic. So this might suggest that noise levels could also be used perhaps instead of air quality sensors or alongside air quality sensors to tell us about sounds as well as the likely air quality that's coming through here. So this is the idea of a possible way that we could go with sensors. Could we put these types of sound sensors out across the city? But so far, these things, the measurement of the vehicle noise, the measurements of noise across the city in Newcastle, are just measuring sound level. And what this really implies is that sound level doesn't tell us everything. And so some of the recent work that's been going on in the policy area and in international standards is the move from just thinking about noise to think about noise and soundscape. So it's not just the level, but the types of noise that there are. So just to give an indication of the levels that we're talking about, noise is often measured in a decibel scale, dB scale. And here's an example on the left-hand side here of an example decibel scale. So we can see here that around 100 decibels is the sort of noise that a road drill jackhammer might be, or a large truck. Rock concert, that's the typical sort of sound, 100 dB. That it's really a ratio to the limit of hearing. So the quietest sound that you can hear is down at 0, and every time you go up 10 is a factor of 10 in energy from there. So it's a bit like a sort of Richter scale, if you like, earthquake scale, but for sounds. But that's really only going to tell you how loud something is. It's not necessarily going to be correlated with the impact that it has. So there's a rough correlation, and the graph on the right here is just an indication of noise against annoyance. And so this is measurements, recent measurements from the World Health Organization. They pulled together a lot of studies, and you can see the noise along the bottom is roughly correlated with the way that annoyance goes up on the vertical scale, but there's a lot of variation in here. So actually the variation is more to do with the types of sounds and the quality of sounds. And so in some areas, you get more annoyance even for a quieter sound. So the impact that the sound's actually going to have on the way that people feel about where they are, we need to know more about it than just measuring the level. So here's an example from, for example, picking up a rock concert or aircraft taking off. Both of these could be about 100 decibels. But if you're interested in music, you're much more likely to enjoy the rock concert, but not the aircraft taking off. I used to live under the flight path of Heathrow for a while, and you get used to it, but it's not something you particularly enjoy. On the other hand, if you're an aircraft spotter, then you might be more interested in the aircraft takeoff, and you might not particularly like the rock concert, particularly if it might be next door to you while you're trying to get to sleep. So these are things that really the emotional response that you have is not going to be told by the noise level meter. It's a bit like if you wanted to rate food using only temperature, or a picture using just how bright the picture is on average. You need to know something much more about that. And this leads us to this idea of soundscapes rather than just sound level. And so on the left, we've got the traditional way that we often think about noise, that noise is something it's measured in dB, it's something that's bad, it's something that you want to reduce as much as possible. And so the focus historically has been on just making things as quiet as you can. But actually, if we're thinking about what makes an urban area interesting for people to be in some areas, you want it to be a vibrant area. If it's too quiet, people aren't going to want to go there because it will seem strange or spooky, like a sort of ghost town. So what we have on the right-hand side is about creating the sound as the right type of sound for the area that you're going to be in. There's a word appropriateness sometimes that's used in here. So sound is a resource that makes people feel that it's the right type of place that you want to prefer. So the area of preferred sounds for a particular area. And so these might be different depending on where you are. And if you want to go to out in the evening, you want to hear the sounds of people from bars and so on, when we're able to get back to that. And the difficulty with this for the way that we normally do is that this requires sound to be judged based on human judgment. It needs people to tell you about what they feel about the sound. You can't just measure it with a simple meter. So expand on this a little bit. This is often expressed in a sort of two-dimensional map. If you like, you could think about this as a sort of color map of different sorts of sounds. And so often there are a couple of different dimensions that we think about here. Left and right, you've got unpleasant to pleasant sounds, and up and down, we've got eventful to uneventful sounds. So if we were in the area of pleasant, uneventful sounds, it might be a sort of quiet sound, perhaps in a park, something like that. Pleasant and lively sounds might be a concert that you've been to. Quiet and unpleasant sounds might be machine noises in the background. It's not particularly loud, but it still gets at your brain. And so these are the sorts of things that actually maybe we need to avoid these. And then there's this other aspect of appropriateness, that which of these fits with the area that you're in. So in the Noise and Soundscape Plan for Wales, for example, it talks about traffic noise. You might expect that as part of urban living if it's sort of in the background, but you wouldn't expect it to be part of a natural park. So if you're getting traffic noise coming into a park or an area where people want to relax, it's not going to make it a very relaxing environment. It's not what you expect to be there. And so there's this appropriateness. Does it sound right for the area that you're in? So if we're looking about how to measure these, we talked about the fact that you need people and people's opinions. So here's an interesting study that was done with the University of Sheffield, Ghent and Naples, where they characterised an area of Brighton ahead of doing some redesign of this sort of strip of a garden and park area. And you can just see in the inset picture, these are people who are walking around this area, listening to the sounds around and then reporting on the different types of sounds that you hear. So this is called a sound walk. You can do these in small groups, ask questionnaires. There are consultancies that specialize in doing this. In fact, just a week or so ago, I was on a virtual sound walk that was organized by a consultancy, Apex Acoustics, as part of doing a redesign of some area from there. So normally you would do this in person so that you get to see and hear where you are. And the types of questions that people will be asked as part of this, as part of a questionnaire: what types of sounds do you hear? Traffic sounds, natural sounds, sounds of crowds, and so on. But also what you feel like in those different areas. So here, the little blue maps on the right tell you about the types of sounds you can hear, and so you can see that the top left one of this quadrant actually tells about traffic sounds. There's quite a lot of traffic in this area, but you can see there's a little quiet area where there isn't so much traffic, and that tends to have more in the way of natural sounds. If I go on to the next slide, then we can see some other maps that correspond to what people have reported in terms of pleasant sounds and chaotic sounds. So these are on that sort of quadrant that I showed a couple of slides back. And this will give a bit of an idea of what the sound quality is like and how people feel about different places as part of this map. So these are the perceived areas that people are in, but this is just a snapshot. If you carry out a sound walk at a particular time of day, it could be very different at other times of day, and you're only getting one set of people from here. So another project that's looked at across how to get these types of sound quality and perceived areas is from social media. So this is a project called the Chatty Maps project that looked at London and Barcelona. And here they used tags from social media with geolocated areas. So you know where people have maybe taken a photograph and tweeted or Instagrammed about what they feel about an area. And by matching up the words to these sort of these perceived areas, you get a sense of what people feel like when they're in these areas. Now, this is quite a busy map here. You can have a look at the Chatty Maps project for more details here, but you can pick up here, this is an area of central London. So we can see the area marked 1 here. So this is Regent's Park, and you get these marked as being relatively calm. Whereas in area 6, which is Soho, this comes out as being vibrant. And this is the sort of thing that you would want from your city area. You can also see the traffic lines marked as chaotic. So they're areas of busy traffic along here. And those are areas that wouldn't be particularly relaxing or wouldn't be where people would want to be spending their time as part of a vibrant area. Now, this comes from 10 years of social media data. So rather than a snapshot, it's an accumulation of things, but it does suggest, is this something that we could measure in more of a real-time area? Could this help us in policy if we could do this? Instead of getting it from social media, instead of getting it from sound walks, could we build some technology to do that? And that might help us as part of building and monitoring soundscape policy. So probably of the UK nations, so there is, each UK nation has its own action plan for noise, and in the case of Wales, noise and soundscapes. So Wales is probably the most recent of these. This is from 2018. And so they're already thinking about the soundscape approach. Soundscapes, it's now becoming published in international standards. So now you can, these ways of measuring are now standard ways that you can follow based on International Standards Organization, ISO standards. And the idea here is that it's about encouraging appropriate soundscapes. So we picked up a little bit on this from earlier about soundscapes for the right area that you want to be in. And it's also about listening to public concerns in terms of the appropriate soundscape that you have in your area. So this really raises the question, could we build technology that would help to measure these types of soundscapes and could measure the impact of the policy changes that we have? Or can we do that so that the sort of sound walks that we've got so far and the measurements from social media, could we use those to help us, but instead, could we measure using microphones instead of just the sound meters that we have currently? So that leads us on to what we can do with AI technology. And so what I want to talk a little bit about here is where we are with sound recognition technology. And so how could this then help us to measure the sorts of things that we've just seen that we want to use? So automatic recognition of sound scenes and events. This is really what we're trying to build here. So at Surrey and elsewhere, we've been working on systems that can listen to sounds and automatically classify these. So scene classification, audio tagging, sound event detection. These are different things that we would want to do. Scene classification, where are we? Are we in the bus, office, at home? Audio tagging, what's in that? Do we hear keys jangling? Do we hear a squeak sound? Sound event detection, this is very specifically, is there a car passing by? It starts here, it moves through later on. And these are things that we could use for many applications. But in order to make this work, we've had to really build a sound recognition research community. 10 years ago, there wasn't a place where this research was going on. And so previously at Queen Mary University London, as I was there, we started gathering sounds to form a data challenge to encourage the research community. This has now become an international research community. We hosted a workshop of that in Surrey in 2018. The next one is in Barcelona, but will be hybrid. So if you're interested, you can be able to join that in November. So there's now this new research community working on sound recognition. But we need data as part of this, and the data that we get, as one example, is from Google released a set from YouTube videos. So here is, if I just pick up one example of the type of sound that we get. Okay, random sounds of various different things. They've been tagged by the people that upload these, but this can give us the large amount of data that we need to train machine learning algorithms to do this work. So example approach, people talk about AI systems, but specifically deep learning methods that are based on what the brain designed on the way the brain is worked, well, let's say inspired by. And I'm not going to go into the details here. If people are interested, they can ask afterwards. But the idea is that you need to work out both where things are and what the sound is, because there's different qualities of sound, different aspects come up in different places of the sounds. So we've done quite well on some of these recently, and as well as recognizing sounds, we can also recognize sound categories, and these are the sorts of things that might help us as part of recognizing the type of impact that sounds will have on people and the appropriateness. So, for example, in a park, you'd expect nature sounds to be the things that you would want to hear. In a city, you'd expect urban sounds to be more appropriate, or sounds of people. And actually, in a challenge that we organised as part of this workshop that we hosted a couple of years ago, other people entered systems to try and predict these, and most were better than about 80% accurate. And that's pretty good in terms of what we want to do. And some of these, even people are not very good at telling the difference between these. So in the UK, we're doing quite well at these processes. We've won a couple of awards as part of this challenge. And I think one of the things that actually has been helping the research community to work is that we share our code. So if you want to build on some of this, the principle of so-called reproducible research allows us to build on other people's work and allows other researchers to build on our work. And so this is something that if you want to build on this, then talk to us and we can share the code that we've got may already be published. So where we're getting to now, sound recognition, it's now becoming commercially available. For example, if you're in the US, the Alexa Guard feature, you can say that you're leaving and Alexa will listen out for things like glass breaking or smoke alarms going off. Google Nest has a similar feature of critical sounds. And the UK company Audio Analytic has recently announced a partnership with Qualcomm to build sound recognition into smartphones so that your phones can hear what types of sounds will be coming out. And if you're in a loud bar, may turn off the vibrate and instead turn on the ringer so that you can actually make sure you don't miss calls. I think another interesting project in working in this space of urban sound recognition is the Sounds of New York City project. So this is building sensors in to combine that with complaints calls. So when people phone up a complaints line, the sound sensors can also not just measure the sound level, but also recognize the type of sound so that they can confirm, yes, it was construction noise that was happening at that time. And that will help with enforcement type activities to say to the construction company, no, you were operating outside of the permitted hours. So this is really leading to our new project on AI for sound. And this is really where we want to move from the data focus that the community's had so far into people. And this means that we want to turn the research agenda around so that the users and stakeholders drive our research agenda. We've got a number of different areas, but for today, the focus is on really the smart cities environment. So how can we use sensors to measure and improve urban soundscapes? And so at this point, I'm going to hand over to Emily Corrigan-Kavanagh to talk about future opportunities. Emily, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. So yeah, as Mark just said, we will now look at future opportunities, and I'm going to break these down into things such as technology innovation, increasing social and economic value, and protecting the privacy of residents. Next slide, please. So in terms of technology innovation, so we've kind of given you a little taster of what might be possible with this new AI technology. And I'm going to allude back to what Mark previously said about how rather than looking at it from a noise perspective where we're looking at noise as waste, we're kind of taking this soundscape approach. So basically what sort of sounds are in the environment, what sort of contexts support how we perceive those sounds, and how can this technology actually help us to create better soundscapes overall for the benefit of society and the well-being of local residents. So obviously this technology innovation that we're talking about, the sound sensing AI technology, it can tell us exactly what different sounds are occurring within the environment. But I suppose what's also really important, as Mark just said, with our participatory activities, is we still need to invite people, we still need to involve people to figure out exactly how those particular types of sound and those soundscapes affect people. Next slide, please. And this is to increase the economic and social value of an area or even properties within that area, because there has been lots of research to show that we can actually increase property value and land value if we reduce things like noise annoyance through, say, things like traffic or airport noise, or if we can kind of change people's perspectives towards these by changing things within the environment. We can also improve the social value of a place by reducing its psychological and physiological impact on well-being. So just going back to some of the points that Mark picked up on the impact that noise, environmental noise can have on our well-being. The European Environmental Agency recently published a report back in 2020 showing that 22 million people actually suffer from chronic high annoyance, and 6.5 million people suffer from chronic high sleep annoyance across Europe and the UK. It can also be linked to 12,000 premature deaths every year and 48 new cases of heart disease. So again, it's really important that we start to address, I suppose, this silent this silent issue that we currently have, because not silent, but not as obvious, I suppose, to things that are more visual within our environment. Next slide, please. So another area, obviously, that we need to really consider when we're using AI systems is the notion of protecting privacy, because again, as Mark pointed out before, AI systems require a huge amount of data to be trained and to operate in a usable manner. Because of this, the machines can be actually listening 24/7. They can be capturing our personal conversations. So it's imperative that we make it very clear to any residents that are close by to these particular monitoring devices or the utilization of this technology. We need to let them know how this data is secured and used. So for this project, we're looking at using federated learning. And this is essentially, in a nutshell, where AI systems are trained and updated using localized data from devices. So this could be literally from a personal mobile phone. But what that means is personal audio never actually leaves the local device. So it protects the user's privacy, and it can be used in a very ethical manner. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the next step. So how we're actually exploring this new sound sensing technology to improve quality of life in urban living. Next slide, please. So as Mark suggested before, we're looking at the use of participatory approaches. And this basically means that we want to go out, we want to talk to people, we want to run activities and workshops, and we want to figure out exactly what the main user needs are in relation to creating healthier living environments using soundscape technology, or technologies that improve our local soundscapes. So participatory approaches are great because they support things like quality listening. They move our perspective from an expert to a participant-led perspective. So again, the end users are the people who are kind of driving the end result of this particular research. They facilitate diverse perspectives. They lead to kind of this co-creation, co-generation of ideas, pollination, cross-pollination of ideas. They also allow us to empower and equalize our stakeholders and encourage dialogue, I should say, over argument. Next slide, please. So here's an overview of some of the participatory approaches that we'll be looking at using. One of them includes expert panels. So obviously this is where we would gather together a group of experts to look at a particular issue that we think requires deep technical knowledge or is very complicated, and it might require input from people from many different disciplines. We'll also be looking at using one-to-one in-depth semi-structured interviews, because this is great for talking about more kind of sensitive topics, building rapport, building a private space to have those discussions. And these can be semi-directed with an interview schedule, or they can be very flexible, as in you can kind of explore different topics as they come up. Focus groups are also very useful, very time-efficient way of gathering data from lots of different people. They're great for utilizing interaction group dynamics, because we have lots of different people gathered together, talking through a particular topic or a question posed. And these can be highly moderated or moderated in a lower sense, where you as the facilitator can guide the discussion, or you can again allow it to be really free flowing. And again, this facilitates a kind of open and divergent thinking. Finally, the World Cafe, I've left this to the end because this is the one we're trying to put together at the moment ourselves. This is a really interesting approach where you would gather lots of people. You could have up to 100 people in a kind of a cafe-esque environment. In this particular scenario, you would divide everybody into groups of no more than 5 sitting at little tables. Again, if we were able to meet in person, everybody would have a nice hot cup of coffee maybe, or hot beverage of their choice. In their little groups on these tables, they would engage in discussions around a particular question posed for 20-minute intervals, usually about 3. After the end of each of these 20-minute intervals, they would switch and go to a different table, where the table chair, who would remain at the table, then summarizes the key conversation points that were raised. At the very end of this session, there would be a final harvest session where everybody comes together and discusses the overall themes that emerged during these discussions. And again, a World Cafe is great. It's almost like doing multiple focus groups simultaneously. It's great for connecting diverse perspectives because you've got lots of different people, again, creating novel concepts. It's a great way of investigating and kind of adding validation to maybe emerging themes or hunches that you had were around a particular issue or problem, and great for establishing sort of future action plans, or in our case, future research topics. So next slide, please. And just going into a little bit more detail about the World Cafe approach, it's really important when you utilize a technique like this to set the right context, because again, you're going to have people from all different walks of life. You want to make sure everybody feels that they have an equal voice, and you want to try and create a hospitable space within that. So usually this is done by encouraging everybody to speak one by one, where no one else interrupts that particular person when they're speaking. And this is to encourage everybody's contribution, and also to facilitate quality listening. And again, because you have such a diverse range of people, this again aims to connect those diverse perspectives. And at the very end, when everybody brings together the kind of key outcomes of their different discussion groups, this is about sharing these collective discoveries, and again, moving on to kind of a higher way of understanding these particular subjects that you're exploring. Okay, next slide, please. So we're hosting a series of virtual World Cafes at the moment. Obviously, we need to do this to abide by current restrictions in place. So at the moment, we are planning to do 2 virtual World Cafes. The first one will contain 20 residents from Guildford. It's going to be hosted on Zoom. Instead of our little tables, we're going to have virtual breakout rooms. So this is where up to 5 people can have kind of private conversations on the same video call, but they can do this without other people listening in. And we would be doing, so essentially we'll start off with a 15-minute introduction, then we'll be dividing people into their breakout rooms. These will be 20-minute each. They'll have 20-minute each breakout room sessions. And there'll be 10 minutes of a mini harvest session at the end of each of these breakout room sessions. And then it'll finish then with a 20-minute harvest session at the end, where everybody will come together and discuss the overall kind of themes that came up during those conversations. So for this World Cafe, there'll be 1 host, which will be one of our project members, 4 scribes, again, just taking notes about what people are discussing in their little discussion sessions, and 4 chairs, which will be a nominated participant for each different breakout room. Next slide, please. So for the breakout rooms, again, because we want to know about the different soundscapes in people's lives, and we want to kind of sensitize them to those themes. So obviously the technology can allow us to categorize and kind of draw this colorful picture of the different sounds occurring in different environments, but we still don't know fully exactly how people feel about those environments or those different sounds necessarily, depending on their particular background or the particular context that those sounds are being heard in. So that's why in these breakout rooms, we want to ask participants to think about the sounds in their locality. So the first question is to describe those sounds. Think about what natural, mechanical, or human sound sources that they hear on a daily basis, what they find pleasant or annoying about these sounds. The second breakout room session will then ask them to describe their ideal soundscape in this particular place. So what would they quieten? What would they amplify? What would they make louder? And why are these important changes for them? And then the final breakout room session will ask them to think of an imaginary technology that allows them to create their ideal listening experience. And I want them to think, well, we want them to think, what form would this take? So is it something that they would wear? Would it be something that would be placed out on the street? How would it work? How would they use it? And are there other instances or places that they would use this in, and how? Next slide, please. So now I want to put some questions to you, the audience, for our next World Cafe with urban residents, wherever that may be. How could new sound sensing technology improve your locality? What questions would you like us to ask? What themes do you think are important? What should we be prioritising? Have a think about what problems you want solving and what are the barriers in addressing these. So how can we work together in that? So now I'm going to hand back to Mark just to finish. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Emily. And so really just to finish off with our final slide, this is really a call to action for you. How can you help us to see this research develop for the benefit of society? What would you like to see come out of this research, and how could sound sensing technology help you? So we've got contact details here, or you can also contact us through the Connected Places catapult. And there are also additional events to find out more. So next month, for example, there'll be an urban sound symposium online, and you can get more information not only from us, but also from a range of other researchers in this area. There's a responsibility summit coming up, and the detection and classification of acoustic scenes, an events workshop coming up in November for those of you that are more interested in the technology side. Okay, so thank you very much for listening and your interest. And at this point, I'll hand back over to Stephen.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Emily. Fascinating, as I expected. We have got quite a few questions that are coming in addition to your call to kind of action for questions. So let's kick off with them. Actually, I'm going to go first, if as prerogative as chair. Mark, during your presentation, you said that data was really important for part of your research, and the fact you've got Google giving you data is amazing. A piece of work that Catapult did a good few years ago was actually people are quite siloed mentality with their data. They want to keep hold of it and not share it. Are you finding that? And what data would you like to have that could help your research further?
Yes, it's a really interesting question. I think if I go back to the situation 10 years ago, then the situation that you were talking about data siloing was really where we were, and that was what inspired us as researchers to go out and capture data and share data that could be used widely. I think that there are important issues about the ownership and copyright of data. We can't just, for example, take videos that people have uploaded on YouTube and use those, because they're owned by the people that created them. So you have to deliberately create data knowing that you're going to share it. There are also privacy issues around there that Emily mentioned about. We have to be really careful not to gather sounds that might include personal conversations or private sounds or whatever. And so that's really important that we do that. So I think in this context, it would be really interesting for us to work out how could we capture data around the city? Could we do the sort of sound walk type work with urban sound sensors? Could we install some trial sound sensors in different areas? We'd have to be careful about not capturing conversations and so on, but that would give us an idea about the sounds across here. So we'd be very interested to be contacted by people that will be interested for us to measure the sounds in their area and what sort of data that we could create from that would help this research.
Fantastic, thanks, Mark. And if anyone's listening on the webinar today that has that requirement or that opportunity, give Mark and Emily a shout. Right, thank you for that. Loads of questions coming in, so let's dive straight in. One of the delegates, Chris, has asked, is there a potential to link noise levels with traffic-related casualty rates?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Yes, it might be. So in that, if the noise level and particular noise in terms of types of traffic sounds are increased, then you'd expect the volume of traffic to increase and also correlate that with casualty rates. But it might also be that we could look out for certain types of sounds. It might be, for example, that if we hear accelerating engines a lot, or if we hear brake squealing a lot, then that might indicate that there's unsafe behaviour of drivers going on in a particular area. I know that there is interest in some areas in the idea of shared spaces. And it might be that measuring the sounds of traffic in shared spaces could tell us something more about how that changes the way that driving behaviours go on by listening to the sounds of driving as well as watching the sounds of driving.
Brilliant. Chris, I hope that's good for you. It sounds like a great suggestion from Martin. One of my colleagues, Will, asked, is there currently work being done on AI as signage and guidance for people with visual impairments, or to guide them around enclosed areas like parks, things like running water which guides you between places? So, is there work being done in this field that could help visually impaired people, basically?
I think there may be work going on in that space. It's not something that we do directly, but there is a research community in auditory display that I know is interested in guidance for visually impaired people. I know a colleague of mine previously from Queen Mary University of London, Tony Stockman, was doing work on guidance for visually impaired people for London Underground when different areas are closed. If you're a sighted person, you see the map that says these lines are closed. If you're not sighted, you need an auditory way of reading those maps instead. But in terms of guidance around other areas, there have been some work on presenting maps that suggest where people could go that would be a quiet or pleasant area as well. So that's not just for visually impaired people, but also for everyone to find where is a nice place to go and have some lunch. And in fact, there was an event that was hosted by the Connected Places Catapult just over a year ago where some of that work was presented.
Fantastic, and thank you for the plug for some of the work that we do in events. Brilliant. I've got a question from Simon, who says, similar to the way Chatty Maps used textual sentiment analysis, has there any work been done concentrating and correlating noise spectrums with stress-related biometrics such as heart rate or sleep quality?
So I haven't yet seen those correlations. The ones that I have seen tend to be just related to noise level. So there are correlations reported of dB level. I think, I'm trying to remember the figure exactly, but I think the World Health Organization reports something like above 50 dB, every extra 10 dB is an 8% increase of heart disease, for example. So there are those types of approximate correlations. But I think it would be an interesting aspect of future work to tie down what aspects of the sounds do really make that difference, because that would help us to know not just we want to make stuff quieter, but what are the sounds that really impact on people and make that difference, that make it a stressful sound. And there is some research where there's the element of control. I think that sense that if it's a loud sound, but you feel like it's something you control, then that's easier to deal with than a loud sound that's out of your control, perhaps your neighbour's music. And in fact, I once worked in a place where one of the people was playing a piano in their office. It was quite quiet. It was quieter than the traffic sound outside, but for one or two people, that really had a major impact on their ability to work, because it sort of stopped them thinking, and so caused a bit of a stressful environment for them. So it's not just the loudness, but it's the impact that it actually has on your thinking.
Thank you for that. I've got a question here from Emily, who's got a COVID-19 related question. How do you think COVID-19 will affect people's views on Soundscape? And how can this be managed when training new technologies through deep learning approaches?
I wonder, Emily, I wonder if you'd have a thought on that that you want to come in with.
I mean, it won't be based on anything, just purely opinion based. But I guess my sense is people, I know generally, again, anecdotally, just from talking to people myself and reflecting on it, I think we have become used to a quieter lifestyle and we're appreciating that more. And I would like to think that because of that, there's going to be more awareness and more sort of action orientated towards creating more pleasant soundscape experiences. I do remember not so long ago, I was out on a walk with my husband during the middle of lockdown, and that was just at the beginnings of this project. And we both reflecting on how pleasant and how comforting it was when we went out on our walk in the forest and we could hear barely no traffic, no sound of planes in the sky. And the novelty itself was amazing, but it was also just this calming experience. So, I mean, I really hope from my own perspective, and obviously with the work we're doing on this project, that there is more awareness now, and that there will be more action towards making more pleasant and more kind of well-being centered soundscapes around us. That's kind of it, really.
And has the pandemic slowed down your research, or the experience that you said you had and other people around the country? Do you think that will help your research?
I mean, it has definitely been harder to get participants, so that has slowed down the research, just because you can't physically go out and talk to people like you used to. On other projects that I've been involved in with participatory approaches, it would be quite normal for you to organise some sort of community-based event where you're educating people, or you just giving talks on awareness around a particular topic. And it's much easier then to pick up people and get people involved in your research that way. And we can't do that at the moment. So it's all done through online. And I think people are getting fatigued by being online and watching things on screen. So reaching them that way just has been a lot harder, definitely. But as I said, as things pick up, and even with the call to action from Westminster most recently, I really hope that there is going to be more investment and more interest in the type of work that we're doing.
I've got a question here from Paul Tanner. What sound sensors have been used in successful outdoor AI experiments, and how should they be calibrated?
That's interesting. I think probably the most closely related to this is the Sounds of New York City project, the Sonic project. So they've been building sound sensors, which actually they've now engineered to, I think they were looking about $100 it cost them to create each one, and they've been using as training material. So we need data for that, but some of the training material has been based on not just the Google data, which the Google team have made available for everyone. So it's not just to us, but also a sound data set called Free Sound. So this is something that if you're interested in finding sounds that you want to reuse for other purposes, the Free Sound archive, which is from the University Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, they ask people to record sounds that are shareable. So they use what's called a Creative Commons license, which means that you know that you have the rights to reuse that sound as long as you comply with the license. And that means that they've actually got access to the real sounds from that, and they use those to categorize the different types of sounds. So they've been using some of this data as part of data challenges to see how accurately can you get the categorization to happen, and using that to really calibrate, are they measuring the right sound? Are they recognizing the right sound from there? It is important that, yes, you're able to make sure that the sounds that you hear do generalize, as it's called in machine learning AI technology, that the sounds that you record in your training data set may be different when you go out into the real world. If you record car horns in New York, they're not going to be the same as car horns in London. So you need to make sure that those things are transferred. And there are interesting AI challenges about how do you make an AI system that's trained in one place, how do you adjust it so that it'll work in a new area and keep working once you've deployed it.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And Paul's question could be relevant for your virtual World Cup. So Paul, something to keep an eye out and reach out to Mark and Emily about. I have a question here from Jamie, and I actually noted down a similar question actually, when you mentioned about the fact that you could use AI in sound to kind of potentially increase value of land, etc. Jamie's question is, do you perceive that this technology could assist planners and developers in large development applications, recording pre-development to assist in determining planning conditions and recording post-implementation to assist with enforcement.
Emily, do you want to pick up that one?
Yeah, I can't see why not. I mean, as we said before, the technology is pretty powerful now, and you're able to do a lot with what we currently have. Like, you can decide on what sort of things are in the environment, where they're coming from, how long they exist. I mean, if you could develop those sort of measures and almost create a soundscape map, and maybe in some way calibrate how you envision people feeling about that particular environment. So I say we need people's input to tell us how they feel about these particular soundscapes, but there has also been a lot of research done on it already. So some things are generalizable, you know, that would give you a good kind of idea, or even kind of a really strong impression of how a particular area might impact on people, even before you do some actual primary research on that area itself. So I can't see why soundscapes couldn't be used in that sense as well, or soundscaping technology, sound sensing technologies for soundscaping couldn't be used in that way.
Brilliant. I think just to add to that, I think there are existing acoustics consultancies that work with planners and builders to really assess what areas are like at the moment and what might change. So, for example, with HS2, to show people what would happen if a new road or a new railway is sent through your area, and ask people's opinions about what mitigation measures might happen. If we built this wall here, if we planted these trees here, it would sound and look differently. So those are things that are already going on by asking people directly, but it's a bit of a snapshot thing. You get to do that snapshot. You can't measure that in real time. Whereas sound sensing technology, if we could build that, and that's really what our research is about, could offer the potential to keep measuring that as it changes and at different times of day and throughout the year.
Brilliant, thanks, Mark. We've got time for one last question, and Lee asked, what is the advantage of sound recognition comparing to image recognition? And I'm going to add something to that, or is it a case of not so much the advantage, is it a case of complementary? So Lee's question first, what is the advantage of sound over image?
So actually, perhaps I will answer both questions together, because I think they are really closely related. And actually, our senses of hearing and vision are also closely related as well. There is, if people are interested, there is an audio-visual effect called the McGurk effect, where what you see of somebody speaking changes what you hear. And so it's actually quite a striking place. You can Google this and find images where if you open or close your eyes, it changes the sound that you hear. It's really strange. And that does have an impact on soundscapes. So the visual aspect of where you are does affect the way that you feel about the hearing of what's going on. If you know where a sound is coming from because you can see maybe cars driving past, that makes sense. Whereas perhaps if it were trees in the way you didn't see the road, you might wonder why it's so noisy. I think from the technology perspective, they are very closely related. And actually what we're finding is that since the recent AI work in deep learning has been coming along, then image processing and sound processing that really used to be completely different communities now share a lot of the same ideas, so that you can sort of think of time frequency maps of sounds as a bit like images, and many of the same techniques are used for sound recognition as the ones that are used for image recognition.
Fantastic, thank you for that, Mark. We've had one last question come in, but I'm not going to actually get you to answer it. I'm going to refer back to your ask of the audience. So I've had a question, and thank you for the interesting talk. So you've got some fans. Thank you. It's been fascinating. Thank you, Mark and Emily. The question is, in your opinion, what will be some of the new interesting research topics for audio in the next few years? I'm not going to ask you to answer it because I know that's what you want to achieve from your forthcoming work and your projects, etc. So to close, thank you. That's amazing, really insightful. For those watching, thank you for staying. Thank you for coming so early. There is a request from Mark and Emily. They want you involved in their work. They want to hear what is what they should research next, and they want you to get involved in the forthcoming World Cafe. So we will share this presentation via email, and their contact details will be in it. So please do reach out to Mark and Emily, because they really do want to hear from you and hear your thoughts and hear what next for this amazing technology. So thank you, Mark. Thank you, Emily, for fascinating insight.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and everyone at Connected Places Catapult for hosting us.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone.
Brilliant, our pleasure. And just to close, thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. As I promised at the start, it was going to be fascinating. I've certainly learned lots, and I'll definitely keep a keen eye out on how this technology evolves. It really is amazing. Thank you for joining us today. We do lots of events, and we have got loads coming up in the not too distant future that you might be interested in. As I said at the beginning, we work with lots of organisations in the UK, and we run an accelerator program for HS2 where we've put various SMEs through this amazing opportunity to learn and work with the HS2 innovation team. If that sounds of interest, we actually have their graduation day event tomorrow from 3:30 till 5:30, where the 5 SMEs that have been working with us and HS2 will share what they've delivered. So that's going to be really fascinating. Next up, we have, next slide, please. If you're interested in drones, we run on behalf of the Department for Transport a drone pathfinder project. Really is about how drones will be kind of rolled out across the UK and what support and what they need, etc. It's a really fascinating project. If you're interested in drones, next Wednesday, 31st of March, please do join us. It's from 10 till 1. You can find more details on our website. Next page, please. And we also have another event on the 31st. It's around innovation and financing to drive sustainability.